Baker Mayfield is a bum as far as I'm concerned. And if anybody's got a problem with it, they can call me.
They've lowered the bar so low for Baker Mayfield so we can give him some kudos about starting.
Baker Mayfield now has a third injury. He's never been a big athlete, small for the position.
I've never ever heard in an evaluation, and I've seen a lot of evaluations that's come out, where they said, well, he can be a starter. The number 1 overall pick could be a 10-year starter. Is that all you're looking for?
Because Baker Mayfield isn't that talented. So, in turn, it is our fault, not his fault. It's my fault that I thought he should have went number 1 overall. It's my fault that I expected him to be a superstar, that I expected him to be a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. Because when you look at it, he's not that talented.
Can we stop the debate if Baker Mayfield's an elite quarterback? The answer is no. Next question, please.
Throughout his entire life, Baker Mayfield has been told that he isn't big enough. He's average at best, he's not clutch, or he's simply not good enough to play quarterback. How did Baker Mayfield, an undersized kid out of Austin, Texas, end up walking onto 2 Division I college football programs and end up winning the Heisman Trophy just a few years later? How did the same kid who went unrecruited after his senior season of high school football end up shattering rookie records with a team known for ruining quarterbacks? Baker Mayfield went from undraftable to the top prospect in all of college football, and from his entire childhood up until now, his life has been filled with ups and downs. This is the perpetual underdog story of Baker Mayfield.
Break!
Baker Mayfield grew up in a small suburb outside of Austin, Texas, and at the age of 3 made the decision to devote his entire life to sports. That's right. At the age of 3, a toddler basically turned to his mother one Saturday morning and said, "From now on, I'm only watching ESPN." While growing up, Mayfield would literally only do 3 things. He would play football and baseball with his friends, and when he came home, he would go swimming in his pool. This isn't very different from most kids growing up, but what was different was Baker Mayfield's tenacity and charm. That charm would help Mayfield plan and plot not only different games for him and his friends to play, but they even pretended to be the professional athletes that they looked up to so much. As the years went on, Baker and his family were ultra competitive with everything. However, from a young age, Mayfield learned that despite his competitive nature, his physical stature might be holding him back. When he was a freshman at Lake Travis High School, Baker Mayfield was listed at 5'2" on the depth chart. However, Mayfield's high school football coach remembered seeing him for the first time and said, "I remember thinking, well, if little old Baker would ever grow, he'll probably be a stud." Mayfield never started in his freshman year. He never even started in his sophomore season. Hell, he wasn't even supposed to start his junior season either. The truth is, Baker Mayfield had to work for his chance to play quarterback and tried to show out every day in practice just so that he could finally play on varsity. And his dedication finally paid off when he got his chance. The first chance Baker got to start in his whole life was in his junior season, but only after starting quarterback and Mayfield's friend Colin Legaze had been injured in practice. For a first-year undersized starter, you'd probably expect a docile quarterback who threw once or twice every drive and mainly ran the ball. However, Baker Mayfield in his first year starting threw 45 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions. He had 3,788 passing yards and won his school's 5th straight state championships in football. Mayfield followed up his junior season with a senior season in which he played 5 less games. So as a result, his numbers naturally dropped to nearly 2,500 passing yards with 22 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions. Not bad whatsoever, but just not as mind-blowing as the year before. However, during his senior season, football wasn't his main priority. Mayfield's family had been going through rough times financially, and as a result had to sell the family's home in Austin, Texas. And since they didn't have much money, they had to live in one house one month and move to another house soon after. During his senior season, Mayfield didn't have stability in terms of his living situation, and the adversity he was experiencing just seemed to make him better. When asked about growing up in Austin and people saying he was handed everything, Mayfield would respond, "I think that's one of the main things that drives me to work harder to show that, in reality, I haven't been handed anything. Rivals.com ranked Baker Mayfield as a 3-star recruit after his senior year, but still for some reason no one would take a risk on the small kid from Austin. However, this adversity didn't stop Mayfield from quitting on football as he walked on to Texas Tech as a freshman and outplayed several quarterbacks on the team to make the final roster despite never being given a scholarship or even being invited to Texas Tech. But something was about to happen that would thrust Baker into the spotlight and force him to shatter record books. After beating out several quarterbacks on the roster, even those who were given scholarships, Baker Mayfield as a freshman was named the backup quarterback going into the 2013 NCAA season. However, in practice, Texas Tech's starting QB Michael Brewer sustained a back injury, thus thrusting freshman walk-on quarterback Baker Mayfield into the starting role, making him the first ever FBS starter to walk on and start his first ever game of college football. Mayfield didn't disappoint either, as in his first career start, he had 5 combined touchdowns, over 400 passing yards, and even completed over 70% of his passes en route to a Texas Tech blowout victory over SMU. The hype surrounding Baker at this point was huge. In week 2, Baker kept the hype up as he tossed 3 more touchdowns and 350 yards as Texas Tech rolled by Austin. Texas Tech would keep rolling, winning 5 straight, but after a string of bad games, including 5 straight games with an interception and a knee injury, Mayfield would soon be benched in favor of Davis Webb. Mayfield finished his freshman year with over 2,300 passing yards and 12 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Baker didn't just pass the eye test, he aced it. Sure, he had flaws in his game, but as a teenager, it was expected. In spite of those flaws, what he could do on the football field was absolutely electric. And he probably would have stayed at Texas Tech, but after a miscommunication with future NFL head coach Cliff Kingsbury, Baker Mayfield would soon transfer to Oklahoma. So you might be wondering, what was that miscommunication? Well, Kingsbury, despite admitting Baker Mayfield was worthy of a scholarship, wouldn't give him one, citing the fact that they had no more to give out. As a result, if Baker Mayfield wanted to stay with Texas Tech, he would have had to wait until after their bowl game for one of the seniors on the roster to give up their scholarship. However, this didn't happen, and Mayfield would ultimately transfer to Oklahoma. Now, Baker didn't just randomly pick Oklahoma. Mayfield grew up watching Oklahoma, and as a result, he was engulfed by Sooner culture. Despite just playing in 8 games with Texas Tech, Mayfield would miss his first season as he wasn't eligible after transferring. After sitting out the 2014 season, in 2015, Baker Mayfield would go on to beat out not 1, not 2, but 3 quarterbacks on scholarship in order to win the starting job. The kid who didn't even garner a camp invite coming out of high school had just beaten 3, 4, and 5-star recruits in order to become a Big 12 starting quarterback. In his first ever game as the Oklahoma Sooners starting quarterback, Baker Mayfield did not disappoint as he totaled 4 combined touchdowns, had 388 yards passing, and completed 69% of his passes. Under Mayfield's reign, the team would go on a roll, only losing to their Big 12 rival Texas by a score of 24-17. After that point, the Sooners wouldn't lose again until it was to number 2 ranked Clemson. But in his first year starting, Baker did not disappoint whatsoever as he put up 3,700 passing yards on a 68% completion percentage, all while throwing 36 touchdowns to just 7 interceptions. Despite it being his first full year starting, Baker still finished top 5 in Heisman voting and was now the new face of Oklahoma football. Year 2 would be more of the same for the Texan gunslinger, but in his first game of that season, he would face his father's alma mater, the University of Houston. Mayfield did all he could to win the game that day, passing for over 320 yards, 3 touchdowns, and even managed to be accurate as he completed nearly 73% of his passes. But this offensive effort wasn't enough to stop Houston, who knocked off Oklahoma 23-33. Although Houston was ranked, this loss lit a fire inside of Baker Mayfield and the Oklahoma Sooners, as they would soon only lose 1 more game that season, that game being to number 3 ranked Ohio State, and the Sooners would end up winning the Sugar Bowl against Auburn by a score of 35-19, a game in which Mayfield had over 300 total yards and 2 touchdowns. In his full second year starting at Oklahoma, Baker Mayfield tossed nearly 4,000 yards on 70% completion with 40 touchdowns to just 8 interceptions. Mayfield was playing on a different level, and in that season included his most infamous matchup against Patrick Mahomes. In that incredible battle against his former school, Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes would combine for 125 points, and the two of them scored a combined 14 touchdowns on the ground and passing, and threw for a mind-boggling 1,279 passing yards. This season would earn Baker Mayfield third in Heisman Trophy voting, and as a result, he would stay for one more year of college football. In just 13 games, Baker Mayfield had gone from a gimmicky quarterback who needed to prove himself to a top NFL draft prospect with a bright future ahead of him. In his final season of collegiate football, Baker Mayfield went on a revenge tour. Who does he want revenge on? The easy answer? Heisman Trophy voters. He wanted the trophy. To prove this, in his first game that season against Texas El Paso, Baker Mayfield nearly completed 100% of his passes. That's right. Baker had attempted 20 passes that game and had completed 19 of them. After this masterclass performance, Oklahoma would play against Ohio State, a team that historically had Oklahoma's number for the past few seasons now. But with the help of Baker Mayfield tossing 3 more touchdowns and nearly 400 yards on a 77% completion percentage, the Oklahoma Sooners were able to defeat the number 2 ranked Ohio State University by a score of 31-16. After the game, in case you somehow forgot, Mayfield would take an Oklahoma Sooner flag, ultimately ending up celebrating on the Ohio State logo at center field, where Mayfield would plant the Sooner flag and cause an uproar soon after. The uproar mainly consisted of butthurt Ohio State fans, but the others were old head football players and scouts who saw this not as a move of leadership and tenacity, no, but a move by someone who acted like a child and had acted like they had never won a big game before. Mayfield wouldn't put these senior season antics to rest, however, as a few weeks later in a game against Kansas, a game in which Oklahoma blew out the Jayhawks 41-3, Baker would grab his crotch area at a fan and in response to being heckled would say multiple times, "Stick to basketball." And to be fair to Baker Mayfield on this one, was he really wrong? In his senior season, Mayfield put up his best stats ever, posting nearly 4,700 yards passing, along with 43 touchdowns and a career-low 6 interceptions. His season stats were helped by a Week 9 victory over rival Oklahoma State, in which Baker Mayfield had a combined 6 touchdowns and threw for 598 yards as the Sooners won their 8th game that season. But most importantly, Baker had just set the single game record in Oklahoma Sooner history for passing yards in a single game. This performance was enough to finally secure Baker's 2017 Heisman Trophy. Despite taking home the nation's top award, Mayfield wasn't too popular amongst college football fans. In the 2017 season alone, Mayfield had done plenty of aforementioned things in order to get booed regularly. Regardless of his polarizing personality, the Cleveland Browns shocked the world when they selected Baker Mayfield as the number 1 overall pick in the 2018 NFL Draft. And in his first year, he would shatter a record held by Peyton Manning and Russell Wilson. Now, to truly have appreciation for Baker Mayfield's NFL career, we need to set the stage a little bit. Ever since the Cleveland Browns would resume operations in 1999, they were consistently shuffling through failed quarterbacks. So when the Cleveland Browns selected Baker Mayfield with the number 1 overall pick, once again, everyone just assumed that this was going to be the latest quarterback in the long revolving door of failed Browns quarterbacks. When you factor that with the fact that the Cleveland Browns went 0-16 the year before, things weren't necessarily trending in an optimistic direction. Mayfield was brought in to finally be the franchise quarterback that Cleveland had been searching for what feels like forever. In his rookie season in the NFL, Baker Mayfield would be named the backup quarterback to Tyrod Taylor initially. But after an injury in Week 3 against the Jets, Mayfield would come in to replace Taylor and in the process Baker Mayfield became the first player since Frank Tarkenton in 1961 to come off of the bench in his debut and throw for more than 200 passing yards while also leading his team to its first win of the season. And for the Cleveland Browns, their first win in over a year. Baker would start the rest of the season, and in just 13 starts that season, Baker Mayfield would throw for 3,725 passing yards, a rookie record of 27 passing touchdowns, breaking the past record held by Russell Wilson and Peyton Manning, and he completed nearly 64% of his passes. His rookie year was highlighted by a Week 11 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals, in which Mayfield threw for over 250 yards and completed over 70% of his passes and threw 4 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield in his rookie season had brought a team that had finished 0-16 the year before to a respectable 7-8-1 record. Mid-season, the team fired Hugh Jackson, and going into the 2019 season, the Cleveland Browns were motivated not to mess this up. They wanted Baker Mayfield to be as comfortable as humanly possible. So they asked Baker Mayfield, now that they fired, who he would endorse to be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, which in hindsight wasn't necessarily the greatest idea, considering that Baker Mayfield was just coming off of his rookie season. So when he was asked who in the previous year's coaching staff he was the most comfortable with, Baker would point to his quarterback coach, Freddie Kitchens. So as a result, the Cleveland Browns elevated Freddie Kitchens, a man that was only an offensive coordinator for 1 season, all the way to head coach. But that's not the only thing the Cleveland Browns would do. They were incredibly aggressive in getting Baker Mayfield a true number 1 wide receiver. So they traded for Odell Beckham Jr. On paper, obviously these were very aggressive moves, but in addition to that, they were calculated risks. After all, the Cleveland Browns went from 0-17 the year before to a 7-8-1 record. But as a result of these moves, Baker Mayfield regressed mightily in 2019. He didn't even complete 60% of his passes. He threw just 1 less interception than he did touchdowns, and the team would finish 6-10. Freddie Kitchens would be fired after just 1 season. The media narrative went from Baker saved Cleveland to Baker needs to leave in order for Cleveland to win.
You got so many questions with Baker. You got enough stuff with Deshaun Watson. Do you really want to answer questions about Baker Mayfield? I would pay the money, give him away to somebody else. Again, I don't feel like he's a Super Bowl quarterback, even with great support. You got a playoff win out of him. He made you relevant for 4 years. You sold a lot of Browns jerseys. I think I'd cut bait here.
However, looking at the film, it's easy to tell that Baker was never put into the right situations to succeed that season. You see, Baker Mayfield isn't your average quarterback. Mayfield does in fact struggle with his deep ball placement. However, he is particularly good at inside 20-yard throws, making the correct reads, going through his progressions, and keeping plays alive. However, Freddie Kitchens must have missed the memo, as in 2019, Freddie Kitchens called plays like he had Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, and Mayfield's lack of ball placement was on full display for everyone to see in 2019. Keep that lack of ball placement in mind because it'll be important. But going into the 2020 season, the Cleveland Browns completely shifted course. Instead of going for a pass-heavy attack, they hired Kevin Stefanski, who understood more than anyone that Baker Mayfield wasn't going to beat you deep, but he was going to beat you underneath. So as a result, the 2020 Cleveland Browns were once again on fire, and so was Baker Mayfield. Behind the running back tandem of Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, Baker Mayfield looked like a bona fide superstar. In a Week 7 shootout against Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, Mayfield proved that he had what it took to hang around in the AFC North, as the 2 quarterbacks combined for 8 touchdowns, but 5 of those belonged to Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield was able to lead his team to 20 fourth quarter points, including a last-second touchdown to Donovan Peoples-Jones in order to secure the win. 37-34. Mayfield's stats once again soared up this season as he put up over 3,500 passing yards with 26 touchdowns to just 8 interceptions. But the stats didn't matter, as the Browns' whole season came down to their final regular season game versus the division rival Pittsburgh Steelers. For the Browns, the plan was simple. If you win, you're in the playoffs for the first time since 2002. The game was at first a defensive dream for both teams, as by halftime the score was just 10-6 in favor of the Cleveland Browns, and the only touchdown so far was a nearly 50-yard rush by Nick Chubb. However, after a few Steeler field goals, Baker Mayfield finding Austin Hooper in the end zone, and a rare Jarvis Landry rushing touchdown, the Browns had the lead 9-24 late in the fourth quarter. But after back-to-back fourth quarter touchdowns by the Steelers, all they needed was a 2-point conversion in order to tie the game and force overtime. But thankfully, the Steelers had Mason Rudolph as their quarterback that game, and so the Steelers failed the conversion, and the Browns had won the game, meaning that they had finished the season 11-5 and had made the playoffs for the first time in what felt like forever. Ironically, the Cleveland Browns' next opponent would be the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoffs, except this time it would be at Heinz Field. The game would start off the exact opposite as their regular season game, as the Cleveland Browns opened up quickly to a 28-0 lead after the first quarter, and by halftime the lead would falter slightly. However, the Browns still led at 35-10. In the third quarter, the Steelers scored twice, but in the fourth, with the help of Baker's third touchdown pass of the game, the Cleveland Browns led 42-23 and inevitably would hold on to win 48-37 in order to win their first playoff game since 1994. The Cleveland Browns would then go on to face the Kansas City Chiefs in the divisional round, and in a close game, the Browns had a chance to win the game. However, they played it a little bit too conservatively, especially against the Kansas City Chiefs, by deciding to punt the ball with less than 5 minutes remaining in the game and never seeing the ball again, which would then lose them the game 17-22. Despite losing to the Chiefs in the divisional round, all was well once again in Believeland. I mean, they truly had a direction after their best season in 2 decades. Going into the 2021 NFL season, the Cleveland Browns and Baker Mayfield were looking to not only make the playoffs, but go deeper into the playoffs than the franchise had ever been previously. However, that would all change as just 2 games into the season, Baker Mayfield would tear his left labrum. Despite this, Baker Mayfield decided that if he played through injury, perhaps he would inspire his team. But in Week 6 against the Arizona Cardinals, Baker would go on to dislocate his shoulder, but this time it would be even worse.
And I fractured the bone because it wasn't going to be like just a clean exit.
Right.
So I fractured the bone. So when I had the labrum done, and that fracture, the inflammation, I had no function in my left shoulder.
Despite literally not being able to move his left arm, Baker would continue on to finish the season. To give you perspective on just how much this injury completely derailed his season, before the Week 6 injury, Baker Mayfield was completing a career-high 67% of his passes at nearly 1,500 passing yards and 6 passing touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. The majority of the interceptions were tipped balls. But after Week 6, Mayfield's stats regressed to completing just 55% of his passes while throwing just 1 more touchdown than interception, and had the same amount of yards that he had in the first 6 weeks, despite playing 3 more games. Baker Mayfield undoubtedly played horribly in 2021, but the team still managed to finish a respectable 8-9, but before the team could finish, Odell Beckham Jr.'s father did no favors to Baker Mayfield's reputation, as he would take to Facebook to repost a lowlight reel of Odell Beckham Jr. being wide open and Baker Mayfield missing him or not throwing the ball at all to him. As a result, the Cleveland Browns would send Odell Beckham Jr. home from practice, and a few days later would cut OBJ from the team. And this would cause a huge divide in the Cleveland Browns locker room, because many people thought that Odell Beckham Jr. had the right to be upset. And what made things even worse is once Odell Beckham Jr. had a true pocket passing QB, he absolutely dominated and returned to form. He would even go on to win a Super Bowl with the Los Angeles Rams just a few months later. This was absolutely unprecedented because never before in the NFL has a receiver's friend or family member, let alone his own father, released a series of plays that literally threw Baker Mayfield under the bus. Despite losing OBJ, the season continued, and although Mayfield did play horrifically, it was not entirely his fault. Whenever most athletes, specifically quarterbacks, try to play through an injury, especially one as bad as Baker had sustained, they're usually heralded as courageous heroes. But for Baker, nope. He was allowed to roast on an open flame as if he was a stuffed pig at a cookout. Despite Mayfield being the player who brought winning football back to Cleveland, despite them consistently being on an upward trend and playing with a tenacity only matched by the city he plays for, the team decided to trade for Deshaun Watson that offseason, thus isolating Baker Mayfield. Since the trade, Mayfield has come out and said,
I feel disrespected, 100%.
Mayfield hasn't been perfect his whole career, sure, but he's been solid. His career is still relatively young. He's only 28 years old, and his cap hit is $19 million. But despite all of this, the Carolina Panthers decided to trade a conditional 2024 fifth round pick to have Baker Mayfield compete against the number 3 overall pick in his same draft class, Sam Darnold and Matt Corral, to be the starting quarterback of the Carolina Panthers. And just based upon the trajectory of Baker Mayfield's career, every single time his career has been at a low point, every time that people started counting him out, Baker Mayfield dug deep and proved everybody wrong. I mean, we're talking about a quarterback that took one of the most poverty franchises in all of sports to their most successful season in decades. So who's to say that his career isn't once again on an upward trend? Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think is going to be next for Baker Mayfield? Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.